I was 17 years old when a pastor slapped me across the face the day before our wedding, and I still married him, thinking I was living out the dream of my life. My name is Hannah Marie Hayes, and I spent 18 years in a marriage that nearly killed me. Literally. Not in a metaphorical way, not in a dramatic exaggeration. I mean, I stood on the ledge of a 9th-floor balcony with my foot already over the edge, ready to end it all. I mean, I swallowed 90 pills hoping I wouldn't wake up. I mean, there were nights when I wondered if the next punch would be the one that stopped my heart for good. But let me go back a little. Let me tell you how it all started, because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how does a smart woman end up in a situation like that? How does someone marry a man who hits her before they even say, I do? Trust me, I've asked myself those same questions 1,000 times, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a 16-year-old girl raised in an evangelical family in Tennessee, a girl who loved God, who wanted to serve, who dreamed of changing the world, ended up becoming the wife of a pastor who would use the Bible as a weapon against her for nearly 2 decades. But here's what I've learned. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens so slowly, so gradually, that you don't even realize you're being swallowed whole until you're already in the belly of the beast. I grew up in a house that knew hell before it knew heaven. My dad, Bob, was an alcoholic, and not the functional kind you see in movies, the ones who hold down jobs and keep it together during the day. No, my dad was the kind who'd stumble through the door at 2 a.m., reeking of cheap whiskey and rage, looking for a fight. I remember the nights when he'd come home, and I'd be in my room with my younger siblings, Jason and Amy, and we'd hear the walls shake from the fights. The smell of liquor mixed with rage is something you never forget. It's like it seeps into the walls, into your clothes, into your memories. My mom, Patty, was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but strong. Too strong for what she had to endure. She'd stand her ground, try to calm him down, try to protect us. But some nights, there was no calming the storm. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, one fight got so violent that I thought my dad was going to kill my mom. I really did. I was hiding in the hallway with Jason and Amy, and we could hear him screaming, hear things breaking, and then we heard my mom cry out in a way I'd never heard before. And that's when something in her snapped. Not broke, but snapped into action. She grabbed me, just me, the oldest, and ran. We didn't pack bags. We didn't take anything. She just grabbed my hand, and we ran out into the night. We ended up in Washington, D.C., at my uncle's place. And when I say place, I mean a camp for trash pickers. He lived in a tent city, surviving by collecting recyclables from the dump. I remember being hungry. Not, I missed a meal, hungry, but hungry in a way where your stomach stops growling and just aches. I remember my mom picking an apple out of the garbage, an actual garbage dump, brushing it off, and handing it to me with tears in her eyes, and that look that said, I'm so sorry, my daughter. I'm so sorry this is what I have to give you. We stayed there for 17 days. 17 days that felt like 17 years. My mom would go through the trash with my uncle, looking for anything we could use or sell. I'd sit in that tent and wonder if this was my life now, if this was all there was, until relatives, well-meaning but ultimately harmful, told my dad where we were. He came to get us, showed up with Jason and Amy in tow, and he was sober, stone cold, sober, and he cried. I'd never seen my dad cry before. He got down on his knees in that trash dump and begged my mom to come home. He promised to change. He swore on everything holy that he'd never drink again, never raise his hand again, never put us through that again. And my mom, God bless her, believed him. Or maybe she was just too tired not to believe him. So we went back. And here's the miracle. He really did change. In 2000, when I was about 12 years old, my dad walked into an evangelical church one Sunday morning. I don't even remember why. Maybe someone invited him. Maybe he was desperate. But he walked in, and something happened. He quit drinking that very day. Cold turkey. Never touched another drop. He became a completely different man. The raging alcoholic who'd terrorized us for years, transformed into the protective, loving father I'd always desperately wanted. He became the kind of dad who showed up to school events, who asked about homework, who actually listened when we talked. It was like watching someone come back from the dead, and I thought, this is what God does. This is the power of redemption. This is what church can do for people. I fell in love with church during that time, not with religion itself, not with rules and regulations and all the thou shalt nots. I fell in love with the idea of redemption, of starting over, of broken families being healed and made whole again. I'd sit in those wooden pews on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights, and I'd look at the altar and see the pastors with their wives standing beside them, so elegant, so anointed, so purposeful. They looked like they had it all figured out, like they were doing God's work, changing lives, making the world better. The pastor's wife would play piano or lead worship or organize events for the women, and she seemed so graceful, so needed, so important. And I'd think, that's what I want for my life. That's my calling. I want to stand beside a man of God and win souls and change lives and be part of something bigger than myself. At 14, I already had positions in the church. I was teaching Sunday school for the little kids. I was helping organize youth events. I was there every time the doors were open. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and any other time they needed volunteers. I loved serving. I loved taking care of people. I loved that sense of purpose, that feeling that I was part of something important, something eternal, and I started dreaming bigger and bigger dreams. I wanted to be a pastor's wife. I wanted to be at the altar beside a man of God, winning souls, changing lives, maybe even going on mission trips to far-off countries. It was the purest, most innocent dream I had, and everyone encouraged it. Hannah's going to make such a good pastor's wife someday, they'd say. She's got the heart for it. And I believed them. But there was something I never told anyone until I was 17, a secret I carried like a stone in my chest, heavy and dark and shameful. When I was 3 or 4 years old, so young I can barely remember my own age, before my dad's drinking got really bad, before everything fell apart, a man my dad hired to work on our farm took me to a stable. We lived out in the country then, and my dad needed help with the land. This man seemed nice, normal, safe, but he took me to that stable. And there, in that place that should have only smelled of hay and earth and animals, he stole my innocence. He touched me in ways a child should never be touched. He made me touch him, and he told me it was our secret, that I could never tell anyone, that bad things would happen if I did. To this day, if I close my eyes, I can still feel that terror, that confusion, that panic that a child should never, ever know. I kept that secret for 14 years. 14 years of carrying that weight alone. I had nightmares every single night until I was 12 years old. Every single night I'd wake up sweating and crying, and my mom would come in and hold me, but I could never tell her why. I'd just say I had a bad dream, and she'd stroke my hair and tell me it was okay. It was just a dream, but it wasn't just a dream. It was a memory that played on repeat every time I closed my eyes. And I blamed my father for so much, not for what happened, but for not seeing it. How didn't he notice? How didn't he see that his daughter had been broken? But I never said anything, never told a soul. I swallowed it like poison, and pretended it never happened. At 16, I was coming home from work one evening in early autumn. The leaves were just starting to turn. I'd always worked, since I was 12, taking care of an elderly woman in our town. That evening, I was walking home when a man on the street stopped me. He was handing out church flyers. He introduced himself as Pastor James Carson, but said I could call him Jim. He was 28 years old. I was 16. He said he'd been a member of my church for 12 years and was now a pastor at another denomination. He had a daughter who was 1 year and 8 months old. His wife, he said with a voice full of tragedy, had cheated on him and abandoned both him and the baby. He painted himself as this tragic figure, a single father, a man of God trying to do the right thing, raising a motherless little girl all alone. My heart melted. I wanted to help. I wanted to fix it. When I got home that day, my mom came to meet me with a book in her hands. "Pastor Jim came by and left this for you," she said, confused. "He said he's going to marry you." I opened the book. There was a beautiful dedication saying he'd fallen in love with me the moment he saw me, that God had chosen me to be his wife. The next day, I ran into him again. This time, he had his daughter with him, a beautiful little girl with perfect curls who ran up and hugged my leg. My heart melted. I thought, this child needs me. This man of God needs me. God is calling me. 3 months later, the day before our wedding, I was walking down the street with him. A church member passed by and greeted me. I smiled and said, "Hi." That was it. Just hi. When I looked forward, his hand came with such force that I felt dizzy. The slap made my face burn. He said with glazed eyes, "Never again, as long as you live, do you greet another man like that with a smile." I cried until I could barely stop. And when I finally said, "I'm sorry, honey," he hugged me and said, "I forgive you." And the next day, in December 2005, at 17 years old with that mark still burning on my face, I walked into a church in white and married the man who would nearly kill me over the next 18 years. The honeymoon was strange from the very beginning. We didn't go anywhere fancy. We couldn't afford it. Jim said the church didn't pay him enough for that kind of thing, so we just stayed in our small apartment in the little Tennessee town where he'd been assigned his first solo pastorate. I wasn't a virgin. I'd had a boyfriend before, when I was 15, during that brief rebellious phase where I'd tested boundaries and made mistakes. So I wasn't completely inexperienced, but I also wasn't prepared for what happened that first night. On the first night of our marriage, in the bed we'd set up together just days before, everything was over in 3 seconds. And I don't mean that as an exaggeration or a joke. I mean literally, actually, truly 3 seconds. Maybe less. He got out of bed immediately afterward without saying anything, without holding me, without even looking at me, and went straight to the bathroom. He stayed there forever. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour. I lay there in the dark, confused, wondering if I'd done something wrong, wondering if this was normal. This pattern repeated itself every single night. He'd come to bed, initiate sex, finish in seconds, never minutes, always seconds, and then immediately get up, lock himself in the bathroom, and stay there until I fell asleep. Every night, without fail. And I started to internalize it. I started thinking, maybe I'm not attractive enough. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. I'd lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the locked bathroom door, and feel this growing sense of inadequacy. I didn't understand what was happening. I thought that's just how it was. That's just how marriage was. Later, years later, I'd discover he was addicted to pornography, deeply addicted. And those moments in the bathroom weren't him being sick or embarrassed. They were his real intimate time. The actual sex with me was just an obligation, a duty, something he had to do to maintain the appearance of a normal marriage. But the bathroom, the phone, the images, that's where his real desire lived. On the 3rd day of our marriage, he woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was pitch black outside, cold, the kind of winter cold that seeps into your bones. "Get up. Let's pray," he said, pulling the covers off me. I was exhausted. We'd been up late the night before at a church event. "But I'm sleepy," I whispered, pulling the blanket back up. "I'm really tired." His voice changed, got harder. "Get up. Didn't you want to be a pastor's wife? Didn't you say you wanted to serve God? Then get up. This is what it means. This is the sacrifice. This is the price of ministry." So I got up. I picked up Maya, who was sleeping soundly in her crib, wrapped her in a blanket, and we walked through the cold early morning darkness to the church. It was freezing. My teeth were chattering. Maya was confused and cranky, barely 2 years old, not understanding why we weren't in our warm beds. And we stayed there until sunrise, praying. Or rather, he prayed out loud performative prayers about the church, about the community, about spiritual warfare, while I held Maya and tried to keep her quiet and warm. On the 4th day, we had our first service in the small Tennessee town where he'd been assigned. It was a tiny congregation, maybe 40 people on a good Sunday, mostly older folks and a few young families. But the people were loving and kind. They welcomed us with open arms, brought us casseroles and pies, told us how excited they were to have a young pastor and his family. An elderly man, I'll never forget him. He had these kind, watery blue eyes and hands that shook slightly from age, came up to me after the service. He took my hand in both of his skin papery and warm, and said, "Welcome, pastor's wife." We're so blessed to have you here. You're going to do wonderful things for this church." He just shook my hand. That was it. A warm, grandfatherly handshake. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing suggestive. Just kindness. When we got home an hour later, Jim dragged me by the hair to the bedroom. I'm not being metaphorical. He grabbed a fistful of my hair at the base of my skull, and he dragged me like you'd drag a misbehaving dog. My head hit the wall as he shoved me into the room. Maya was in the living room playing with blocks, and I was terrified she'd see, terrified of what this would do to her. The punches came to my stomach first, hard, knocking the wind out of me, then my back, my sides, places where no one would see the bruises. "Now I'm going to teach you," he growled, his face inches from mine. "You're not a slut. You're my wife. You don't shake hands with any man. You don't smile at any man. You don't even look at any man. Do you understand me?" I tried to speak but couldn't get air in my lungs. I said, "Do you understand me?" He hit me again, and I managed to gasp out, Yes, I understand." I was 17 years old, 4 days married, 4 days into what was supposed to be the beginning of my dream life. And while our 2-year-old daughter slept in the next room, or at least I prayed she was sleeping, prayed she couldn't hear, I was beaten until I couldn't stand anymore, until I was curled on the floor, arms wrapped around my stomach, trying to protect vital organs. When I could finally speak, when I could finally get enough air to form words, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I apologized. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't mean anything by it. Please, I'm sorry." And he stopped. Just like that. He stopped, stepped back, and then, this is the part that still haunts me, he started crying. Real tears. He knelt down beside me, pulled me up into his arms, and sobbed. "I forgive you," he said, holding me while I bled inside. "I forgive you, but if you behave, if you just do what I say, this won't happen again. It's that simple. Just obey me, and everything will be fine." I learned a terrible lesson that day. I learned that the word sorry had magic power. Every time I apologized, for things I didn't do, for existing in a way that displeased him, for breathing wrong, for looking in the wrong direction, he would stop. The magic word that made the monster retreat back into the man. So I apologized for everything, all the time, for the next 18 years. I'm sorry for making dinner late. I'm sorry for laughing too loud. I'm sorry for being tired. I'm sorry for needing tampons. I'm sorry for existing. I became a woman made of apologies, and each one cost me a piece of my soul. 15 days later, I was making lunch. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was trying to get food on the table before we had to go back to church for evening service. But I got distracted playing with Maya. She was showing me a picture she'd drawn, so proud of herself, and I was praising her, telling her what a good artist she was, and I lost track of time. The food wasn't ready when Jim got home from his office at the church. He walked in, saw no food on the table, and without a word, he walked to the stove and knocked all the pots to the floor. Soup splattered everywhere. Potatoes rolled across the linoleum. The crash scared Maya so badly she started crying. "You're worthless," he said, looking at the mess he'd created. "You're useless. You can't even do the one thing you're supposed to do. What good are you?" And that night, after cursing at me for hours, calling me every degrading name you can imagine, tearing apart my character, my intelligence, my worth as a human being, he said a phrase that froze my blood. "The day you don't give it to me, I'll go find it on the street. Don't think I won't." I couldn't understand. My brain couldn't reconcile what I was hearing with who I thought he was. He was a pastor. He stood in a pulpit every Sunday and Wednesday and preached about holiness, about purity, about Christ's love and faithfulness. He counseled couples about their marriages. He taught Bible studies about being a godly husband. How could he say something like that? How could those words come out of the mouth of a man of God? But I was afraid, deeply afraid. Afraid that he would cheat on me, because then, according to his own theology, I'd have the right to ask for divorce. And I didn't want divorce. I wanted my marriage to work. I wanted my dream to be real. So I made sure he got what he wanted, when he wanted it, whether I wanted to or not. 1 month married, and I was already living in a hell I didn't recognize. He wanted sex every day, multiple times a day, and despite, or maybe because of, the premature ejaculation issue. He'd try to prolong things in ways that disgusted me. I started feeling nauseated by him, physically nauseated. The same nausea I felt when that man touched me when I was 4 years old in that stable. That same sick, dirty, violated feeling. And I realized I'd married my abuser all over again, just in a different form. He wouldn't let me work. "You're going to live from the ministry, serve the people, be a pastor's wife," he'd say. So I depended on him for everything: food, clothes, sanitary products. And he'd throw it all in my face. "I support you. You owe me." Once when I asked for tampons, he told me to use rags. And I did, because I was too afraid to insist on basic human dignity. At church, he'd point at me from the pulpit. My most dignified wife, woman of God, my beloved. People would clap. They saw me as an example. They didn't know that hours earlier, he'd called me a slut, useless, demon-possessed. They didn't know I had bruises under my modest dresses. They didn't know I cried myself to sleep every night. He used the Bible as a weapon more effectively than he ever used his fists. Every time I threatened to leave, he'd open its pages and read, "Whoever divorces without adultery is committing sin." And then he'd look at me and say, "You'll go to hell if you leave me. Do you want to go to hell, Hannah?" And I, at my 17 years with a fear of God greater than my self-love, would answer, "No." So I'd stay. I'd stay and get beaten. I'd stay and cry. I'd stay and apologize for things I didn't do. Because in my distorted mind, staying was obeying God. 6 months later, on a regular night after another beating, I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling. My body hurt. My soul hurt more. And I thought for the first time, I'm not going to survive this. Not, I don't know if I can do this, or this is really hard, but I'm not going to survive this. It was a premonition. A warning from my subconscious that I was on a path that led to my own destruction. But I didn't know, that night, that I was absolutely right. When I was 18, almost 19, I got pregnant, and I wanted it so badly. I wanted to be a mother, more than I'd ever wanted anything in my life. I thought that a child of ours, a real baby, not a stepdaughter but a biological child that we created together, would fix everything, would make Jim truly love me, would bring peace to our home, would transform him back into the man I thought I'd married, or maybe into the man I'd imagined he was. I'd seen it happen in other families at church. A troubled marriage, then a baby, then suddenly everything was better. I thought, this is what we need. This is the missing piece. So I prayed with an urgency and desperation I'd never felt before. God, please give me a baby boy, please. And his name will be Emmanuel Philip. Emmanuel meaning God with us, and Philip meaning lover of horses, but also friend. God with us, a friend, a Prince of Peace. Please, God, fix this marriage with a baby. I took a pregnancy test one sunny afternoon in late spring. The light was coming through the kitchen window in that golden way that makes everything look hopeful and possible. I watched that second line appear on the test, and I swear I felt my whole chest expand with joy. I came home floating on air, barely able to contain my excitement. I spent the afternoon cooking Jim's favorite meal, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, homemade rolls, apple pie for dessert. I set the table with our best dishes, the ones we'd gotten as wedding gifts and rarely used. I lit candles. I put on a dress he'd complimented once. I made everything perfect. When Jim sat down at the table that evening, I handed him the pregnancy test with a smile so big my face hurt. My cheeks ached from smiling. "You're going to be a father," I said, my voice shaking with happiness and anticipation. "We're having a baby. A real baby. Our baby." He looked at the test. His face was blank, unreadable. Then he looked at me. And then, without warning, without a flicker of emotion crossing his features, he flipped the table. The entire table. Food flew everywhere. Plates shattered against the walls. The pot roast hit the floor with a sickening thud. Gravy splattered across the floor, the cabinets, my dress. Maya, who'd been sitting at the table with us, started screaming in terror. "I can't believe you did this," he shouted, standing over the wreckage. "I can't believe you got yourself knocked up. You did this on purpose. You did this to trap me, to control me, to ruin my ministry. I reject this child. Do you hear me? I reject it. I want nothing to do with it. You're going to deal with this child on your own. This is your problem, not mine." I froze. I literally couldn't move, couldn't process what was happening. This was supposed to be a joyful moment. And he continued, his voice getting louder, more vicious. And another thing, I'm sure this child isn't even mine. You're a slut. Who's to say it's mine? How do I know you haven't been sleeping with every man in the church? I was 1 month pregnant. We'd had sex every single day that month. Every single day because he'd demanded it. There was no possible way this baby was anyone else's. But he looked at me with such conviction, such certainty in his accusation, that for a moment I doubted myself. For a moment, I wondered, did I do something? And then reality crashed back. This baby, who was still the size of a seed, who I'd already named Emmanuel in my heart, was being called a bastard by his own father before he was even born. I cried alone that night. Jim slept on the couch, or maybe he didn't sleep at all. I don't know, and didn't care. I lay in bed with my hands on my still flat stomach and cried until I couldn't cry anymore. But the next day, I called my mom. I needed someone to share this with, someone to be happy for me, even if my husband wasn't. She answered on the second ring, and I said, "Mom, I'm pregnant." I expected joy, congratulations, excitement. Instead, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, her voice careful and measured, "How did Jim take it?" And I broke down. I told her everything, the table, the accusations, the rejection. She cried with me over the phone and said, "Come home, Hannah, please. Just come home. You can stay here. We'll help you raise the baby. You don't have to stay with him." But I didn't go. I still thought he'd change. I still thought that when the baby was born, when he held his son for the first time, he'd fall in love. I just needed to be stronger, more patient, more forgiving. The pregnancy was strange. I didn't have morning sickness, didn't have any of the typical symptoms. No nausea, no food aversions, no exhaustion beyond the emotional exhaustion I already carried. It was as if my body was saying, "See, you can do this alone. You don't need him. You're strong enough." I talked to my baby Emmanuel all the time. When Jim was at church, when I was alone in the apartment, I'd put my hands on my growing belly and talk to him. I'd tell him about his grandparents, about his big sister Maya, about the world he was coming into. I'd sing to him. I'd read to him. I'd promise him that everything would be okay, that he'd be safe, that he'd be loved. I was lying to my son before he was even born, because I didn't know if everything would be okay. I didn't know if he'd be safe. I only knew that he'd be loved by me, and I prayed that would be enough. When I was 8 months along, my belly huge and my back aching constantly, Jim started taking business trips out of state with some men from the church. They had this scheme where they'd drive to border states, buy cheap merchandise in bulk, and bring it back to resell at a markup. Discount clothes, electronics, household goods, anything they could turn a profit on. Jim said the church wasn't paying him enough, that he needed supplemental income. I thought it was great. Not the money, I didn't care about the money. I thought it was great because the farther away he stayed from me, the better. Every trip meant a few days of peace, until one night, he left for one of those trips, and left the computer on. I'd never touched his computer. It was his. He'd made that clear. But that night, I was sitting in the living room nursing my aching back, 8 months pregnant, and uncomfortable in every position, when messages started coming in. Beep, 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 the sound that would change my life. I got up, awkward, ungainly, my belly leading the way, and waddled to the desk. I sat down in front of the screen. They were messages from a woman. Social media messages, chat messages, dozens of them scrolling up the screen, and I started reading. They were messages from a woman in Los Angeles. There were months of conversation. Months. Flirty messages, intimate messages, planning messages. I read everything. Each word was a knife. He'd told her he lived with his parents because he'd fallen on hard times. He'd told her he was a struggling pastor, that his parents were elderly, and he was caring for them. No mention of a pregnant wife. No mention of a daughter. He said he was broke, that he desperately wanted to come visit her in Los Angeles but couldn't afford the trip. And she, sweet, trusting, naive, had sent him money, $400 by wire transfer. I saw the confirmation email, and he'd scheduled a meeting for the week after next. A hotel room. He'd written, "I love you. I can't wait to finally be with you in person. We're going to be together, I promise. I sat there, 8 months pregnant with this man's child, reading about his plans to start a new life with another woman, and something in me snapped. Not broke, snapped into action. I grabbed that computer with my huge pregnant belly, yanked it from the outlet with a strength I didn't know I had, carried it out to the backyard, and destroyed everything. The keyboard, the monitor, the CPU, the mouse, the cables, everything. I found a broom, and I beat it all to pieces. When he got home and saw the wreckage, he was beside himself, but not like someone caught red-handed. He was beside himself like someone falsely accused. "You're crazy," he said, his voice actually shaking with what seemed like genuine emotion. And then he started crying. Really crying, sobbing. He called my brother Jason. "Your sister is having a mental breakdown. She's pregnant and unstable." He called my parents. Same story. He was on the phone for hours, crying to anyone who would listen. "She's accusing me of cheating. I swear to God I've never cheated on her. I swear on my daughter's life. I swear on this unborn baby." And I, 8 months pregnant and exhausted and hormonal and beaten down, started doubting what I'd seen with my own eyes. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I really was crazy. That's what gaslighting does. It makes you doubt your own reality. A few weeks later, I had contractions in the early morning. My water broke at 5 a.m. I didn't want to wake Jim, so I called my dad. "Dad, it's time. Come get me." He was there in 15 minutes. I got to the hospital at 5:30 a.m., and half an hour later, my son was born. Normal delivery, quick, no pain. As if God was saying, "At least I'll make this easy for you." 2 hours later, Jim showed up. He picked up the baby, smiled for the nurses, played proud dad. "I'm going to register him," he said cheerfully. I said, my voice firm. "His name is Emmanuel Philip. Emmanuel Philip. That's his name." He nodded, said of course, kissed my forehead, and left. When he came back an hour later, he handed me the birth certificate. I read the name. Matthew Joel Carson. Not Emmanuel, not Philip. A name I didn't choose. "Why did you change it?" I asked, tears falling. "Because I'm the father," Jim said. "I decide. I'm the man. I'm the head of this house. If you want to change it, you fill out the paperwork, pay the fees, explain to everyone why. Or you can accept it and move on." I had no money, no job, no way to navigate a legal system I didn't understand. So I looked at my son and whispered, "Your name is Philip. It'll always be Philip to me." Jim took my biggest dream, being a mother, choosing my son's name, honoring a promise to God, and crushed it, deliberately, as an assertion of power, as a reminder that I had no voice, no choice. That day, something in me broke in a way that never healed, and 3 months later, with a baby who cried every night, and a stepdaughter who already knew too much about violence, I discovered something that would make everything so much worse. Philip was 2 months old when Jim went to officiate a wedding in a neighboring town about 30 miles away. It was Saturday evening, 6 p.m., and he said he'd be back right after the ceremony. He promised he wouldn't stay for the reception. "In and out," he said. "Quick ceremony, then home. I'll be back by 8, maybe 9 at the latest." I stayed home with both kids. Maya, now almost 6 years old, and Philip, a tiny fragile infant who wouldn't stop crying no matter what I did. He cried like he knew something I didn't, like he could sense that something terrible was coming. He got home at midnight, 6 hours late. No call, no text, just walked through the door at midnight like it was normal. He didn't apologize, didn't explain, didn't check on the kids. He came straight to me where I was sitting on the couch, finally having gotten Philip to sleep. "I need to talk to you," he said. His voice was strange, flat. "At the church. Tomorrow, after service. It's important." My heart sank. I knew. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. Something about his tone, his posture, the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes. The next day, with my C-section stitches still inflamed and aching, Philip was 15 days old, and the incision wasn't healing right. I walked into that church and sat in front of him. We were in his office. He sat behind the desk, put me on the other side, like I was there for a business meeting, like he was my boss, not my husband. "At yesterday's wedding," he began, looking down at his hands. "After the ceremony ended, I gave rides home to some of the church ladies who'd helped with setup. Sister Margaret, Sister Ruth, and Pastor Carlos's wife, Jennifer. He paused, took a breath, still wouldn't look at me. After I dropped off Sister Margaret and Sister Ruth, I was alone in the car with Jennifer. And it happened. I sat in silence, waiting, my C-section incision throbbing. What happened? I asked, though I already knew. I was with her, in the car. We were together. Pastor Carlos's wife, his best friend, his ministry partner, a married woman, a mother of 3 children, respected in the church, and my husband, in a car, in a parking lot, after a wedding, while I was home with our infant son and stitches that wouldn't heal. Why did you bring me to the church to tell me this? I asked. My voice was eerily calm. He opened the Bible that was sitting on his desk, opened it to a specific page, like he'd marked it, like he'd prepared for this. Because here, you're obligated to forgive me. This is God's house. You can't refuse to forgive someone in God's house. The Bible commands forgiveness 70 times 7. He read the verse out loud, his voice taking on that preaching tone. And whoever does not forgive cannot be forgiven. You have to forgive me, Hannah. You have no choice. And then he closed the book and said the phrase that made me see, for the first time with complete clarity, who he really was. And another thing, there's not just $100,000 coming into this church every year. You're very naive, Hannah. You're a child who doesn't understand how the world works. What do you mean? I asked. My heart was pounding. He laughed. A cold laugh, without humor. You think I report all the church's income correctly? You think I tell the board about every offering, every donation, every dollar that comes through those doors? You think I work for God for free? He leaned forward. I'm not losing this church. I'm not losing these people. I'm not losing the income. And you're going to forgive me, Hannah, because you have no choice. Where are you going to go? You have 2 kids. You have no job. You have no car. You have no money. You have nothing. You're nothing without me. In that moment, I understood I hadn't married a man of God. I'd married a thief, a liar, a manipulator, a criminal who used Jesus as a front, who used the church as a money laundering operation, who used scripture as a weapon to control and abuse. And I had 2 kids depending on me, and I had no way out. No job, no money, no profession. I was trapped as surely as if I were in a prison cell. When the church leadership discovered months later that the numbers didn't add up, someone noticed discrepancies in the books. They didn't report him to the police. They didn't press charges. They simply transferred him to a smaller church. It's best for everyone if this stays quiet, they told him. We don't want scandal. But Jim was outraged. He decided to leave, to strike out on his own. And with the money he'd stolen over the years, he set up a new congregation, rented a building, bought equipment, launched a website. And guess who supported that church when it started failing? Me. Because around that time, a woman from church taught me to sew. Her name was Margaret. She saw something in me, some desperation, and said, "Do you want to learn? I have an extra sewing machine." I opened a small shop in the spare bedroom of our apartment, with Maya helping me after school. She was in 1st grade now, and she'd sit next to me and hand me pins and thread. And for the first time in years, I handled money that was mine. Money I earned. It wasn't much at first. Alterations, hemming pants, fixing zippers. But it was mine. Jim didn't do anything anymore. He'd given up. His church had failed. He watched Netflix all day while I worked 16 hours a day. He'd sit on the couch in his pajamas at 2 p.m., and he'd yell at me to keep the noise down. The sewing machine was too loud. So I started supporting the household. Rent, food, kids' school supplies, utilities, everything. And he'd curse at me for it. You think you're something because you work? You're still mine. You still owe me. This is still my house, my family, my rules. And every night, whether I'd worked until midnight or not, whether I was exhausted or not, he'd come for me. When I said no, he didn't accept it. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with him on top of me, his hand covering my mouth so I couldn't scream. "Stay quiet," he'd whisper. "This is what you deserve." He'd rape me while I pretended to be asleep, while I left my body and went somewhere else in my mind, while I counted the cracks in the ceiling or recited Bible verses. It was easier that way. Easier to leave my body there like an empty shell. When the pandemic hit in early 2020, everything shut down. My sewing shop stopped. But within days, I realized people need masks. So I started making them. I worked day and night. Maya, now a teenager, worked with me. We'd sew until our hands cramped. Jim's cousin, who lived in another state, heard what we were doing and called, "I'll buy 1,000 masks from you." 1,000 masks. It took us 2 weeks of nonstop work, but we did it. And that cousin paid us enough to cover 3 months of back rent that Jim hadn't told me we owed. When the cousin came to pick up the masks in person, drove 6 hours because shipping was backed up, Jim lost it. The cousin was there for maybe 10 minutes, loaded the boxes, thanked us, gave me a hug, a quick, familial, appropriate hug, and left. And Jim, watching from the window, exploded. "You're having an affair with him," he shouted. "You're sleeping with my own cousin." And he kicked me hard in the leg with his boot. The vein in my leg burst right then. I felt it pop, saw the bruise spread instantly. I still have the mark to this day. You're selling yourself to him for money. That's what you are. A prostitute. That night, after he fell asleep, I stayed up looking out the window. We lived on the 9th floor of an apartment building. I looked out at the city lights and the dark sky, and I thought, if I jump, it all ends now. It was such a simple thought. So calm. So logical. Just open the balcony door, step over the railing, and let gravity do the rest. 3 seconds, and then peace. I went to the balcony, unlocked the sliding glass door. The cold wind hit my face, and it felt like permission. I put one foot on the ledge, my bare foot on the cold concrete. I could see down to the parking lot below, the cars like toys. I put my hands on the railing. All I had to do was lift myself up and over. One movement and this would all be over. I took a breath, preparing to pull myself up. And then I looked back. I don't know why. Some instinct, some force told me to look back. And I saw them. The 3 kids sleeping in my bed. Maya at 18, Philip at 12, Sophie at 6. And I heard a voice. I don't know if it was God or my conscience, but I heard it clearly. If you jump, he won't take care of them. If you jump, they'll be left with him. And I took my foot off the ledge, stepped back inside, closed the door, went back to bed. But that night I understood something fundamental. I didn't want to die. I wanted that life to die. I wanted that marriage, that man, that situation, all of it, to die. I wanted to kill the circumstances, not myself. And if I didn't have the courage to kill the situation, to end the marriage, to walk away, then the situation was going to end up killing me. It was that simple, that clear. Stay and die, or leave and live. There was no third option. It was on a regular afternoon, a Tuesday, I think, that everything finally changed. One of those unremarkable days you'd forget about completely under normal circumstances, but that ended up being the axis on which my entire life turned. Jim was sitting on the living room couch, lounging in his pajama pants even though it was 3 p.m., watching something on his phone. Philip, 12 years old now, was lying on the floor doing his math homework, his textbook spread out in front of him, pencil in hand. Sophie, 6 years old and in 1st grade, was playing with her dolls in the corner, having a tea party with imaginary guests. I was in the kitchen finishing the dishes, my hands in soapy water, thinking about what to make for dinner, and whether I had enough fabric to finish the order I was working on. Just a normal afternoon. Until I heard Philip shout, "Mom! Mom! He's watching bad stuff with us right here." I ran to the living room, water still dripping from my hands. Jim had hidden his phone quickly, but not quickly enough. I'd seen it, the image on the screen. It was pornography, explicit, graphic pornography, with the kids right there, with our 12-year-old son doing homework 3 feet away, with our 6-year-old daughter playing innocently in the corner. I exploded. Something in me that had been compressed and contained for so long finally burst out. "You're watching porn with the kids in the room? You're watching porn with our children in the room? You're disgusting. You're sick. You're..." But I didn't get to finish. He jumped up, his fist already raised to hit me, his face twisted with rage. Philip threw himself in front of me, my 12-year-old son, who should have been worrying about middle school drama and video games, threw his body between me and his father's fist. The punch that was meant for me hit my son square in the face. I watched it happen in slow motion, Jim's fist connecting with Philip's cheekbone, Philip's head snapping back, Philip falling. His mouth bled immediately, split lip, and when he got up, when he pushed himself off the floor and stood facing his father, his eyes were different. It wasn't my little boy anymore. It was a teenager full of hate and rage and violence, a teenager who'd reached the absolute limit of what he could endure. "Mom," he said, wiping the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand, his whole body shaking with rage, his voice low and dangerous. "The day I grow up, I'm going to kill him. Do you hear me? I'm going to kill him. And if you don't change our situation, if you don't get us out of here, I'm going to do it sooner. I'm going to do it now. I'll go to jail. I don't care. But I'm going to kill him before he kills you." And I saw, in that moment, with absolute clarity, what I'd done, what I'd allowed to happen. I'd raised a child so traumatized, so damaged, so broken by witnessing years of abuse that he was planning murder. My 12-year-old son was standing in our living room with blood running down his chin, telling me he was going to commit murder, and it was my fault. I'd stayed. I'd allowed this. I'd chosen this man over my children's safety. That night, I didn't sleep. Not 1 minute. Jim went to sleep in the living room, sulking as always, playing the victim. And I went to the bedroom window and talked to God in a way I never had before. Not the prayers I'd been taught in church. Not the submissive, reverent, proper prayers. I talked to God like a human being, without asking for blessings, without asking for Jim to change, without asking for strength to endure. I said, "I know you got me out of here once and I went back. I know I made that choice. But now, if I leave, I'm not coming back. Do you hear me? I'm not coming back. I'm done. I'm finished. If you help me leave, I will never, ever come back to this. Help me. Please. Help me save my children." In the morning, my sister Amy called me. We hadn't talked much lately. Jim had isolated me from most of my family, monitored my phone calls, limited my contact with people who might tell me to leave. But she called that morning, and when I answered, she said, "Hon, I just sent $300 to your account. I don't know why. I woke up this morning and felt like I needed to send you money. I know that's weird, but I did it. It's there. $300. It was almost nothing in the grand scheme of things. It wouldn't pay for a security deposit or a down payment on a car, but it was everything I needed to start. It was gas money. It was food money for a few days. It was enough to run. When Jim woke up, I was in the kitchen making coffee. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I knew what I was going to do, and I wasn't afraid anymore. He came up behind me and hugged me from behind, as if nothing had happened the day before, as if he hadn't hit our son, as if he hadn't been watching pornography in front of our children. As always, he pretended. "You going to behave today?" he asked, his breath on my neck. "You going to be good?" I turned around, looked him in the eye, smiled, and said, "Yes, honey, I'm going to be the best. You're going to have the best wife in the world today." He smiled back, satisfied, convinced. He kissed me on the forehead. "That's my girl," he said. "I'm going to the church to pray for a few hours. I'll be back by lunch." "You taking the car?" I asked, keeping my voice light and casual. "No, I'll walk. I need the exercise. The fresh air will do me good." "Perfect." I made coffee for him, put it in his favorite cup, added the exact amount of sugar he liked, and waited for him to leave. I watched him walk down the hallway, waited for the elevator doors to close, counted to 60 to make sure he was really gone, and the second I was sure, I ran to the bedroom. "Philip, Sophie, get up now, right now." They woke up scared, confused. It was early, barely 7 a.m. "What's wrong?" Philip asked, already alert, already sensing danger. "We're leaving, right now. We're leaving and we're never coming back. Just grab what you love most. 1 bag each. Quickly. We have maybe 30 minutes." I threw clothes into garbage bags. I didn't even pack properly. Just grabbed handfuls of clothes from drawers and closets. I grabbed our documents. Birth certificates, social security cards, school records, anything that might be important. I grabbed my sewing machines, which were my livelihood, my only source of income. I threw everything in the trunk of my car, not caring about organization, just throwing it all in. Maya was already living on her own by then, renting a small room near her college. But I called her. "I'm leaving, forever. I'm actually doing it this time. I'm leaving him and I'm never going back. She started crying. Finally, Mom. Finally. Oh my God, finally. Where are you going? Do you need help? No, I said. Stay where you are. I'll call you when we're safe. I love you. I'm so sorry it took so long. I put Philip and Sophie in the car. Philip sat in the front seat, staring straight ahead, his jaw set. Sophie sat in the back, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Silent. I pulled out of the garage, and when I passed by the church street, I saw Jim standing there in front of the building. He was looking the other way, talking to someone. I had maybe 5 seconds before he'd turn around and see us. I threw the apartment key through the gate slot so he'd know I wasn't coming back. I hit the gas. I drove. Philip said, "Where are we going, Mom?" I said, "Nashville. We're going to Grandma and Grandpa's. We're going home." I went to Philip and Sophie's schools first. I walked into each office, probably looking wild and desperate, and said, "My children are in danger. I'm leaving their father. I need their transfer papers right now. Today. I can't wait. Please." The principals, seeing my face, seeing my desperation, understanding something terrible was happening, didn't ask questions. They gave me the documents in half an hour. Everything official. Everything proper. I turned off my phone and drove. I drove for almost 200 miles with my heart beating so loud I thought it would explode out of my chest. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see him chasing us. Every car that got close made me panic. When I stopped at a gas station to use the bathroom and get the kids some food, I turned on my phone to call my mom and tell her we were coming. There were 349 missed calls. 349 calls in 4 hours. I answered the next call that came in. "Where are you, you slut?" he screamed. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been screaming for hours. "Where are you? Where are my kids? You kidnapped my kids. You come back now or I'll kill you. I will find you, and I will kill you. I'm going to tell everyone you robbed the church. I'm going to tell everyone you're crazy. I'm going to destroy you." I took a deep breath and said, my voice calm and steady, "I'm free, and you're never touching me again. Never. I'm done. We're done. It's over." I hung up. I blocked his number. I blocked him on every social media platform. I blocked his email. I blocked every possible way he had to contact me. And I drove to Nashville. When I got to my parents' house, my mom was standing at the door waiting. She must have been watching for us, because the second we pulled into the driveway, she was running toward the car. She opened my door and hugged me and said nothing. Didn't ask questions. Didn't say, "I told you so." Just held my head against her chest and cried with me. My dad appeared a moment later. He looked at me with such sadness, such relief, such love. He said, "You should never have left here the first time. But you're home now. You're safe now." And for the first time in 18 years, I slept in peace. The next day, with my mom watching the kids, I went to the police station and filed for a protective order. I hired a lawyer, paid with the money I'd saved from sewing, money I'd hidden from Jim in a separate account he didn't know existed. I filed for divorce. Jim didn't want to sign. He called from different numbers. Friends' phones, church members' phones, numbers I didn't recognize. He'd beg, "Please, I'll change. I promise I'll really change this time." Then he'd threaten, "If you divorce me, I'll make sure you never see those kids again." But I never went back, never answered, never wavered, never again. The first few months after I left were the hardest months of my life, and that's saying something considering what I'd been through. It wasn't hard because I missed Jim. I didn't miss him even a little bit. Didn't miss him for one single second. It was hard because I had to rebuild an entire life from scratch, from nothing. I was 35 years old, 3 kids depending on me, no college degree, no professional experience beyond sewing and hairstyling, and trauma that seemed bigger than me, more powerful than me, something I thought I could never overcome. I woke up every morning with panic attacks. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't function. I'd stand in the shower and just cry, letting the water hide my tears, trying to be quiet so the kids wouldn't hear me falling apart. I kept sewing. It was the only skill I had that could generate real income. Maya came to live with me again. She'd left college temporarily to help me, and I felt guilty about that. But she insisted. "Mom, I'm not letting you do this alone," she said. And we worked together. We set up a small sewing shop in my parents' garage. We started selling masks, which were still in demand because the pandemic was ongoing. Then we branched into alterations, then custom clothes, then uniforms for local businesses. I learned hairstyling too, took an online course, practiced on myself and my mom and my sister until I was decent at it. I worked 14 hours a day, because being tired was better than thinking. Being exhausted was better than having time to process what had happened, what I'd survived, what I'd lost. Jim tried everything to make me come back. He sent flowers to my parents' house, expensive bouquets with cards that said, "I love you," and "Please forgive me," and "I can't live without you." He sent letters quoting Bible verses about forgiveness and redemption, and second chances. Long, handwritten letters where he'd apologize profusely and promise to change and tell me he couldn't live without me, that he'd do anything to get me back. Then, when that didn't work, when I didn't respond to any of it, he sent threats. Letters saying he'd tell the church I'd stolen money, saying he'd prove I was crazy, an unfit mother, saying he'd get custody of the kids, saying I'd regret this for the rest of my life. But I had documents. I had proof. I had medical records of injuries. I had photographs of bruises I'd taken over the years. I had Philip's therapy records documenting the trauma. And most importantly, I had my truth. The protective order helped, but it wasn't enough. He found out where I worked. I'd started taking hairstyling clients at a small salon that let me rent a chair. One day, I was serving a client, doing highlights, chatting about normal things like weather and weekend plans, when I saw him, through the salon window, standing in the parking lot, just standing there, staring at me. My whole body froze. My hands stopped moving. The client asked if I was okay, and I couldn't even respond. My throat closed up. My vision tunneled. But before he could come inside, before he could approach, my dad appeared. My dad had been following me secretly because he suspected Jim might try something, might show up, might try to hurt me or intimidate me. And my dad, who'd transformed from an alcoholic abuser into a protective father, stepped between me and Jim. "You don't touch her," my dad said, his voice firm and loud enough for everyone in the parking lot to hear. "You don't come near her. You don't look at her. You leave right now or I call the police." Jim looked at my dad, looked at me through the window, saw that he'd lost, and left. Philip started therapy after we left. The school counselor recommended it after he failed 3 classes in a row and got into a fight with another student where he'd broken the kid's nose. He had so much anger inside him, so much rage that seemed to come out of nowhere and everywhere at once. I was afraid of what he might do, to himself or to others. The therapist, a kind woman in her 50s named Dr. Rodriguez, said he had PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, a 12-year-old child with PTSD from domestic violence, from watching his mother get beaten for years, from being beaten himself, from living in constant fear and chaos and violence. I cried in the car after that first session, sitting in the parking lot of the therapist's office, knowing I'd failed to protect him, knowing I'd let this happen to him, knowing I'd chosen to stay with his father for far, far too long. Sophie was younger, so in some ways she adapted faster. She didn't have as many memories of the worst times, but she had nightmares, terrible nightmares. She'd wake up in the middle of the night screaming, crying, calling for me, convinced that Jim was in the room, that he was going to hurt us. I'd sleep on her bedroom floor for months, just so she could reach down and touch me during the night, so she could know I was there, so she could know she was safe, that no one was going to hit anyone anymore, that the screaming and the violence and the fear were over, that we were in a new place, a safe place, and he couldn't find us here. Maya, my stepdaughter who was more daughter than anything, was my rock. She was 20 years old and more mature than me in some ways. She'd seen everything. She'd survived everything with me. She'd lived through the abuse from the time she was a toddler until she was old enough to move out. "Mom," she'd say when I was having panic attacks, when I couldn't breathe, when I thought I was going to die right there in the middle of the grocery store. "You did the right thing. We're going to be okay. We're out. We're safe. We made it." And she'd work with me, sewing beside me for hours and hours. She'd take care of Philip and Sophie when I couldn't. She'd hold my hand when I had panic attacks in public places because I thought I saw Jim's car or someone who looked like him. She became my partner, my support, my reason to keep going when I wanted to give up, because I had panic attacks constantly, several times a day in the beginning. In the middle of sewing, out of nowhere, my heart would start racing. I couldn't breathe. My vision would tunnel. The room would spin. I'd go back, mentally, to that 9th-floor apartment, with my foot on the balcony ledge, wanting to jump, or I'd be back in our bedroom with him on top of me, hand over my mouth, hurting me. My mom learned to recognize the signs, the way I'd start breathing faster, the way my hands would start shaking, the way I'd get this distant look in my eyes. She'd hold me and say, "You're here. You're in Nashville. You're at your parents' house. You're safe. He can't hurt you anymore. He's not here. You're safe. Breathe with me. In, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Out. 2, 3, 4. And slowly, I'd come back to the present, come back to safety, come back to reality. I tried dating once, a few months after the divorce was final. A kind man I met at the new church I was attending. A different church, a healthier church, where I didn't have to be in leadership, where I didn't have to perform or pretend or be anyone's example, where I could just attend and worship and leave. His name was David. He was gentle, patient, understanding. He knew I was coming out of something difficult. We went on a few dates, coffee, dinner, a walk in the park. Normal things, safe things, simple things. But when he tried to kiss me one evening, just a simple goodnight kiss at my front door after a nice dinner, something in me broke. I had such a severe panic attack that I fainted, literally lost consciousness right there on my parents' porch. I woke up in the hospital with my mom holding my hand and David looking terrified in the corner. The doctor said, "You need therapy, Hannah. Professional help. What you've been through isn't something you can just push through on your own. You need help." And I finally admitted, out loud, to someone other than myself, I need help. I can't do this alone. I can't heal from this without professional support. Therapy was brutal, more brutal than I'd expected. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, was kind but direct. She didn't let me minimize or deflect or pretend things were okay when they weren't. Talking about everything, the abuse at 4 years old, the marriage, the rapes, the beatings, the control, the manipulation, the financial abuse, the spiritual abuse, all of it, was like opening wounds that had never properly healed, like taking a knife and cutting open scars that had formed over infected flesh. I'd cry so much in sessions that I'd leave with swollen eyes, unable to see properly, my face blotchy and red, mascara running down my cheeks. But slowly, session by session, week by week, month by month, I started understanding something fundamental. None of that was my fault. Not the abuse as a child, not the marriage, not staying as long as I did, not any of it. I'd been groomed, manipulated, controlled, trapped by someone who was very good at manipulation. And I'd survived. That was the thing to focus on, Dr. Chen said. I'd survived. I was still here. I was still fighting. And that took tremendous strength. Jim stopped paying child support regularly. The court had ordered him to pay $800 a month for 2 kids, but he'd send money only when he felt like it, in random amounts, without any pattern or consistency. Some months $200, some months nothing, some months $50. It was just another way to maintain control, to keep me dependent, to remind me that he still had power. But I didn't go after him legally. I didn't fight for the money he owed, which was adding up to thousands of dollars by this point. I didn't want anything from him. I didn't want his money. I didn't want contact with him. I was supporting my kids on my own. It was hard. It was exhausting. Some weeks I didn't know how we'd buy groceries. Some months I paid utilities late and got warning notices. But it was my money, my work, my life. And that autonomy, that independence, was worth more than any child support check could ever be. A year after the separation, I enrolled in college. I'd always wanted to go to college, but Jim had never let me. "You don't need college," he'd always said. "You're a pastor's wife. That's your education. That's your calling. What more do you need?" But now I could choose. I could decide for myself. I started with pedagogy, because I wanted to understand education. wanted to help other children who might be going through what my kids went through. I studied at night after the kids went to sleep. I'd sit at the kitchen table with textbooks and my laptop, doing homework until 2 a.m., then get up at 6 a.m. to sew and work and take care of the kids and drive them to school. There were days I'd doze off over the books, my head dropping onto the pages. Days I didn't think I could continue, didn't think I had the energy or the brain power or the time. But I didn't give up, because giving up wasn't an option anymore. I'd given up too much of my life already. I wasn't giving up this dream. In 2023, 2 years after the separation, I met Daniel Shepard at church. Everyone called him Dan. He was different from everything I'd ever known in a man. He was kind in a way that seemed almost foreign to me at first. He'd ask permission before touching me, even just touching my hand or my shoulder. He'd say, "Is this okay? Are you comfortable with this? Can I hug you?" He treated me like a human being, like someone with autonomy and choice and value and worth, not like property or an object or something he owned. And for the first time in my entire life, I understood what it meant to be truly loved. Not controlled, not manipulated, not possessed, but actually, genuinely loved. We got married in a small ceremony, just family and close friends. Nothing elaborate, nothing expensive. Just simple and real and honest and beautiful. Philip walked me down the aisle. He was 15 years old and looked so handsome in a suit, so grown up, so proud. Sophie scattered rose petals ahead of me, her face serious and concentrated, doing her job perfectly and beautifully. Maya cried happy tears from her seat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. And when Dan said "I do," when he looked into my eyes and promised to love and honor and cherish me, to be faithful and true, I looked back at him and thought, it was worth surviving. It was worth fighting. It was worth all the pain to get to this moment right here. For 10 months, I lived what should have been my marriage from the beginning. Dan would wake me with coffee every morning, my favorite coffee, made exactly how I liked it, with just the right amount of cream and sugar. He'd hold me when I had nightmares about Jim, when I'd wake up screaming and sweating and convinced I was back in that apartment. He'd play with the kids, actually play, get down on the floor and build Legos with Sophie, shoot baskets with Philip, have long talks with Maya about college and her future and her dreams. He'd go to therapy with me, sit in the waiting room reading a book, or sometimes come into sessions if I asked him to, if Dr. Chen thought it would be helpful. He wasn't perfect. Nobody is. But he was good. Genuinely, deeply, truly good. And he loved me in a way I'd never been loved before. Until one afternoon in 2024, the phone rang. It was the police. There'd been an accident. A car accident on the interstate. Another driver had crossed the median, had been texting and driving and hit Dan's car head-on. Dan didn't survive. Died instantly, they said. As if that somehow made it better. As if that made the loss any less devastating. And once again, once more, there I was, widowed at 36, with a heart that I'd just barely learned to open again now shattered into pieces, trying to understand why God had given me that tiny taste of real happiness, that glimpse of what love could actually be, only to rip it away, only to take it back, only to say, "Look, this is what you could have had, but you don't get to keep it." But this time was different. When Jim destroyed me, when I was with Jim for all those years, I thought I'd never be whole again. I thought I was broken permanently, shattered beyond any possibility of repair. When Dan died, I understood something I'd never understood before, something fundamental about myself. I was already whole. Dan hadn't completed me. He hadn't fixed me. He hadn't filled some void or healed some deep wound in my soul. He'd loved me whole. He'd loved me exactly as I was, broken and healing and scarred and strong and fragile and resilient all at once. And that love, even though it was brief, even though it only lasted 10 beautiful months, had shown me something I'd carry with me for the rest of my life. I deserved to be loved. I deserved kindness and respect and gentleness and consideration. And nobody, not Jim, not death, not trauma, not loss, not anything in this world, could ever take that knowledge away from me. Today, I'm 37 years old. I'm sitting here in my small apartment in Nashville, telling this story to you, and I barely recognize the 17-year-old girl who accepted that slap the day before her wedding. When I look at photos of her, of me, I see a child. A scared, desperate, naive child who was so small, so vulnerable, so desperately hungry for love and purpose that she accepted poisoned crumbs thinking they were a feast. She thought a man hitting her was love because he said, "I love you," afterward. She thought control was protection. She thought abuse was discipline. She thought suffering was her calling. And I want to reach back through time and hold that girl and tell her, "Run. Run as fast as you can." But I can't. So instead, I tell you, I'm not her anymore. I'm not that scared 17-year-old. I'm not even the broken 35-year-old who fled with 3 kids and garbage bags full of clothes. I'm someone different now. Someone harder and softer at the same time. I have scars, physical ones and emotional ones. A mark on my belly from when I fled pregnant and tore my skin on the fence. The dark mark from the burst vein on my leg. A literal map of violence written on my body. I have nightmares where I wake up gasping, thinking he's in the room. I have triggers, loud, sudden noises, men who stand too close, doors slamming, raised voices. But I also have something I didn't have before. I have myself. I have my own voice, my own choices, my own life, and nobody can ever take that away from me again. Maya is 22 now, studying dentistry in Murfreesboro. She comes every weekend with her laundry and stories about college. She met a good guy who treats her well. When she introduced him to me, she pulled me aside and said, "Mom, I learned from you what I will not accept. I know what love isn't supposed to look like because I watched what happened to you. And I know what love is supposed to look like because I watched how Dan treated you. You taught me everything I need to know." And I cried, because that was exactly what I needed to teach her. Philip is 17, the same age I was when I got married. When I look at him, I see how much of a child I was. He still does therapy, still carries trauma, but he's also kind, protective, smart. He told me recently, "Mom, I'm not going to be like him. I'm going to be like Grandpa Bob, someone who made mistakes but changed. I promise." And I believe him. Sophie is almost 11, the best math student in her school. She paints beautiful pictures, sings in church. Yes, I still go to church, but a different one where nobody uses God as a weapon. When people ask about her family, she says, "My family is Mom, Grandma Patty, Grandpa Bob, Philip, Maya, Uncle Jason, and Aunt Amy." Jim's not on that list, because he never deserved to be. I finished college last year with a 3.7 GPA. Got a good job at a logistics company with salary, benefits, 401k. When my paycheck hits every 2 weeks, I still get emotional. Because it's mine. Because I earned it. Because nobody can use it to control me. I contacted Rosa Morales, Maya's biological mother, a few years ago. We became friends. Her marriage to Jim was exactly like mine. The same abuse, the same manipulation, the same use of religion as a weapon. He'd used false witnesses and stolen church money to take custody of Maya. Rosa wasn't the slut he painted. She was another victim. Today, we're both survivors. We raised Maya together, even from a distance, because a mother isn't who gives birth. It's who stays, who loves, who fights. In 2025, I met Marcus Williams at a grief support group. He'd lost his wife 2 years earlier, has a 13-year-old daughter, Lily. We talked about pain, loss, how you rebuild when everything falls apart. Slowly, friendship became something more. Marcus is careful with me, knows I have triggers, so he asks permission for everything. "Can I hold your hand? Can I hug you?" At first I found it strange, but now I understand. This is respect. This is real love. Love that cares about boundaries and consent. I don't know if I'll marry Marcus. It's still early, and that's okay. Because I don't need a man to save me. I already saved myself. But it's good to be loved without pain. Good to know love doesn't hurt, doesn't control, doesn't destroy. Jim is still a pastor somewhere in Tennessee. On his 3rd wife now. I feel sorry for her. I pray for her. I know the hell she's living. But I also know it's not my responsibility to save her. She'll have to save herself, like I did. All I can do is tell my story and hope it helps someone find the courage to leave. If you're living something similar, I need to tell you, it's not your fault. I don't care what he says, how many verses he quotes, how many times he cries and promises to change. It's not your fault. The abuse is not your fault. His choices are not your fault. You are not responsible for fixing him or loving him enough to make him stop. Second, you're not crazy. I know he tells you that you are, that you're imagining things, overreacting, being too sensitive. You're not. He wants you to think you're crazy so you won't trust yourself. But your intuition is right. Your fears are valid. You're not making it up. You're being abused, and recognizing that is the first step toward freedom. Third, most important, you can get out. I know it seems impossible. I know you don't have money, family, anywhere to go. I know you have kids depending on you. I know you're exhausted and broken and don't think you have strength left. But I promise you, you have a strength inside you that you haven't discovered yet. A survivor who's been growing stronger even while you've been suffering. I discovered mine on the 9th floor with my foot on the ledge, choosing my children over death. You don't need to go that far. You can discover it now. Today, the door is there. It's been there the whole time. And I won't lie. On the other side, there's pain, struggle, uncertainty, fear. Nights when you'll cry yourself to sleep wondering if you made the right choice. Days when you'll be so overwhelmed you'll think maybe you should go back. But there's also freedom. Real freedom. The freedom to make your own choices. To raise your kids without violence. To go to bed without wondering if tonight's the night you don't wake up. There's peace. The chance to be yourself again. The possibility of being truly happy. Of being loved the right way. Of looking in the mirror and recognizing yourself. And that is worth every second of the fight. Every moment of fear. Every tear. Every struggle. It's worth all of it. Because you deserve to be free. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to be loved without pain. You deserve to live. Not just survive, but actually live. To wake up feeling hope instead of dread. To make decisions about your own life. To have dreams again. To laugh without worrying. To breathe without permission. The door is there. It's always been there, even when you couldn't see it through the darkness. You just need to have the courage to turn the handle.